The hearing room in the Hart Senate office building was a theater of mahogany and marble, designed to project the permanence of American power. But on this Tuesday morning, the atmosphere felt less like a legislative proceeding and more like a gladiatorial arena. The air conditioning hummed, struggling to cool a room packed with reporters, staffers, and the restless energy of a capital city sensing blood in the water. At the witness table sat Nancy Pelosi. Even at 84, the former Speaker of the House commanded the room with the gravitational pull of a collapsed star. She wore a custom Armani suit, a shade of royal blue that cost more than the average American's annual mortgage payments. Her posture was rigid, her hair perfectly coiffed, her expression one of bored amusement. She was surrounded by a phalanx of aides and a lawyer whose billable hours could fund a small school district. She had survived impeachments, insurrections, and decades of partisan warfare. She looked at the man on the dais not as an equal, but as a temporary inconvenience. Sitting elevated above her was Vice President JD Vance. At 40, he offered a stark visual contrast. He wore a standard dark suit, his tie slightly less perfectly knotted than the lobbyists in the back row. He sat with the stillness of a Marine, shoulders square, hands resting calmly on a closed manila folder. There were no stacks of binders in front of him, no team of consultants whispering in his ear. Just the folder. The hearing began with the customary banging of the gavel, but Pelosi didn't wait for the formalities to settle. She leaned into her microphone, her voice carrying that distinct, clipped San Francisco cadence that had dictated the legislative agenda of the United States for nearly 4 decades. "Vice President Vance," she began, elongating the syllables of his title as if it were a joke she was sharing with the room. "I must say, I admire your audacity. I read your little book, Hillbilly Elegy. Charming. Very authentic." She paused, letting a small, icy smile touch her lips. "Exploiting your family's struggles for profit and political advancement is very on-brand for your generation. I've flown over Middletown, Ohio, many times on my way to places that matter. I'm sure it has a certain rustic charm, but perhaps you can understand why I don't take lectures on governance from someone who has been in Washington for, what is it now, 3 years?" She waved her hand dismissively, a gesture that had dismissed presidents and prime ministers alike. "I have negotiated with 7 presidents. I have passed legislation that defined the 21st century. I have been fighting for working families since before you were born. When you have actually accomplished something in this city, anything at all, then perhaps we can have this conversation as equals." A ripple of laughter moved through the Democratic side of the gallery. Adam Schiff covered a smirk. Hakeem Jeffries nodded, appreciating the master at work. It was a classic Pelosi power move. Establish dominance, belittle the opponent's credentials, and declare victory before the first question is asked. "Young man," she added, the term landing like a slap. "I have been ending political careers since before you learned to read. Are you absolutely certain this is the hill you want to die on?" The threat hung in the air, heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and institutional power. Vance didn't flinch. He didn't interrupt. He waited until the echo of her voice died down. Then a slight smile crossed his face. Not the smile of a politician scoring a point, but the smile of a man who knows something the other person doesn't. "I appreciate the history lesson, Madam Speaker," Vance said. His voice was soft, carrying the flat vowels of the Rust Belt. It cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "My mama, my grandmother who raised me, She used to say something too. She said, "Powerful people get real uncomfortable when poor people start asking questions." Vance slowly opened the folder in front of him. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. You talk about your years of service. You talk about your power. But where I come from, we don't judge a leader by how long they've held the gavel. We judge them by who they fought for. He looked directly at her. Let's see if my mama was right. Analytical expansion, status dynamics, and the clash of archetypes. This opening section establishes the fundamental conflict of the narrative: heritage versus hierarchy. The status game: Pelosi employs high-status behaviors. She uses condescension, little book, young man, references her tenure, 7 presidents, and physically dismisses him with hand gestures. She is operating from the archetype of the matriarch of the institution. Her power is derived from the system itself, and she uses the weight of that system to crush dissent. The asymmetric response. Vance refuses to play the status game on her terms. Instead of defending his credentials, which would validate her frame that credentials matter most, he pivots to moral authority. By invoking his grandmother, Mama, and Middletown, he grounds his authority in lived struggle rather than institutional tenure. The trap. Pelosi's opening monologue is designed to bait Vance into an emotional outburst. By remaining calm and referencing a saying from home, Vance flips the dynamic. He positions himself not as a politician, but as a prosecutor for the forgotten man. The hillbilly label she uses as an insult becomes his shield and his sword. This sets the stage for a forensic deconstruction of her elite status. Vance reached into the folder and pulled out a single photograph. It was printed on high-gloss paper, blown up large enough for the cameras in the back of the room to see clearly. "Madam Speaker," Vance said, "do you remember this?" He held it up. The image was iconic, though perhaps not in the way Pelosi had intended. It was dated April 2020. It showed Nancy Pelosi standing in her gourmet kitchen in Pacific Heights. She was flanked by 2 massive stainless steel refrigerators. The doors were open, revealing shelf after shelf stacked high with pints of gourmet ice cream. She was smiling, holding up a pint of Jenny's splendid ice cream like a trophy. "Let's talk about the context of this photo," Vance said. His voice was measured, almost gentle, which made the words land harder. The country was in lockdown. We were facing a plague. 40 million Americans had just lost their jobs in a matter of weeks. In my home state of Ohio, food bank lines stretched for miles. I saw the pictures. Cars lined up as far as the eye could see. Proud people. People who had never asked for a dime in their lives, waiting 6 hours for a box of pasta and some canned vegetables. Vance paused, letting the image of the food lines clash with the image of the ice cream. Small businesses were closing forever. People were afraid to go to the hospital. Families couldn't visit their dying grandparents. The fear in this country was palpable. It was a physical weight. He set the photo down on the table, face up. "And you appeared on national television, on a late-night talk show, to show America your freezers." "Sub-zero refrigerators," Vance noted, looking at a spec sheet. $24,000 each. You had 2 of them, filled with ice cream that costs $13 a pint. You showed off $48,000 worth of appliances and hundreds of dollars of desserts, while 40 million Americans were wondering how to feed their families. He looked at her. "And then the host asked you a question. He asked, 'What is your favorite flavor?' And you laughed. You treated it like a fun little quarantine anecdote. Pelosi's expression hardened. The bored amusement was gone, replaced by a flash of irritation. "That was a light-hearted moment during difficult times, Mr. Vice President," she snapped. Americans were scared. They needed to see their leaders staying positive. I was trying to bring some levity to a dark situation. I have worked my entire career to ensure— Levity, Vance repeated the word, tasting it. My mama raised me on government cheese, Madam Speaker. Food stamps, commodity food. We didn't have levity. We had survival. Vance leaned forward. She worked double shifts at a nursing home, cleaning up after people, changing bedpans, doing the jobs nobody else wanted to do. $24,000, the cost of one of your freezers, was more than she made in an entire year of back-breaking labor. I have passed the CARES Act, Pelosi interrupted, her voice rising. I secured $2 trillion for American families while you were writing books about your sad childhood. I kept this economy afloat. You did pass the CARES Act, Vance agreed. And while you were doing that, you were signaling to every working person in this country that you inhabit a different universe than they do. Both things are true, Madam Speaker, but only one of them tells me what you actually value. Vance pulled out another document, a statistical report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Let me read you some numbers from that same month, April 2020. Unemployment, 14.7%. Food bank demand, up 40%. Small business closures, over 100,000 permanent closures. Families who couldn't make rent, 30%. He dropped the paper on top of the ice cream photo. And there you were. Chocolate. Vanilla. Sub-zero. What's your favorite flavor? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Someone in the back whispered, "That's right." It was audible. Pelosi's chief of staff was typing furiously on her phone, likely trying to kill the clip before it went viral. But it was too late. Where I come from, Madam Speaker, we have a name for that, Vance said. My mama would have called it putting on airs while your neighbors starve. Marie Antoinette had a different phrase, Vance added. I think you're familiar with it. Analytical expansion, the symbolism of excess and insulation. This section deconstructs the semiotics of wealth in politics. The artifact, the ice cream freezer, is not just an appliance, it is a symbol of insulation. In a time of national crisis, COVID-19, the ability to hoard luxury goods signals that the leader is immune to the suffering of the citizenry. Vance weaponizes this artifact to strip away Pelosi's champion of the people brand. The contrast principle, Vance juxtaposes the specific dollar amounts, $24,000 freezer versus minimum wage income, to create a moral gap. It isn't just that she is rich, it's that her wealth is flaunted in the face of poverty. This triggers the let them eat cake archetype, the out-of-touch aristocrat who cannot comprehend the reality of bread prices. The tone shift. Pelosi attempts to frame the moment as levity, emotional leadership. Vance reframes it as tone deafness, moral failure. By linking the freezer to his mother's labor, he personalizes the insult, making it not just a political gaffe, but an offense against the dignity of the working class. Vance moved the ice cream photo to the side. He didn't put it away. He left it visible, a visual anchor for the audience. He reached back into the folder and pulled out a much thicker stack of documents. These were stapled, dense with numbers and charts. But ice cream is just tone deafness, Vance said. It's insulting, but it isn't illegal. Let's talk about something more serious. Let's talk about your husband's investment portfolio. Pelosi's hand tightened on her pen. Her knuckles went white. This was the third rail. Your husband, Paul Pelosi, is a remarkably successful investor. Madam Speaker, Vance said, his voice taking on a forensic tone. In fact, by some measures, he might be the greatest stock picker in American history. He looked up at the ceiling, pretending to calculate. Better than Warren Buffett. Better than George Soros. Better than every hedge fund algorithm on Wall Street. Better than anyone who has access to the same public information the rest of us have. Pelosi's response was immediate and rehearsed. My husband's business affairs are entirely separate from my legislative work. I have no involvement in his investment decisions. He has his own sources, his own research, his own— I'm sure he does, Vance interrupted. Let's look at those sources. He held up the first document. June 17, 2021. Paul Pelosi purchases call options on NVIDIA, a semiconductor company, between $1 million and $5 million worth. That is a lot of confidence in a single stock. July 28, 2021. 6 weeks later. You, as Speaker of the House, publicly announced your full support for the CHIPS Act, which includes $52 billion in subsidies for semiconductor companies like NVIDIA. The result? Over the following months, NVIDIA stock rises over 40%. Your husband's options are now worth approximately $4 million more than he paid for them. On one trade. Vance threw the document onto the table. He picked up another. March 2022. Paul Pelosi buys Visa stock. At the exact same time, legislation that would have hurt Visa's business by regulating credit card processing fees is mysteriously delayed in committee. It never reaches the floor. The stock holds steady, while competitors tank. December 2021. Call options on Alphabet, Google's parent company. Purchased weeks before massive big tech antitrust legislation gets quietly shelved under your leadership. Vance spread the papers out like a royal flush. I have 17 trades here, Madam Speaker. 17. Every single one made weeks before legislation that affected those stocks was announced, passed, or killed. Every single one profitable. Pelosi's voice rose, sharp and defensive. Republican senators did the same thing. Richard Burr sold stock before COVID. Why aren't you asking about your party's trades? This is partisan persecution designed to— If there are Republicans who traded on inside information, bring them forward, Vance replied calmly. I'll ask them the same questions. I'll hold this hearing as many times as necessary. Corruption doesn't have a party registration. But today, right now, I am asking about your husband's trades. Can you explain them? Silence. The average retail investor, the guy in Middletown with a 401k, is happy with 10% annual returns. Your husband consistently gets 30, 40, 50% on these specific trades. Warren Buffett's lifetime average is about 20% annually. He is considered the oracle. Your husband beats him consistently. My husband is a successful businessman who— Your husband is either the greatest investor in human history, Vance cut in, his voice dropping to a whisper, or he has access to information the rest of us don't. Those are the only two explanations. He gathered the documents into a pile and tapped them on the table. Which is it, Madam Speaker? Genius? Or something else? A reporter in the back row snapped a photo of the pile of documents. The hashtag Pelosi portfolio began trending before Vance even finished his sentence. Katie Porter, the progressive congresswoman from California, who had once called Pelosi a mentor, was staring at the floor, unable to look at the witness. Analytical expansion. Insider trading as institutional decay. This section tackles the erosion of public trust through soft corruption. The statistical impossibility. Vance attacks the narrative of luck or skill by using comparative data. Warren Buffett. By showing that Paul Pelosi statistically outperforms the greatest investors on Earth, he forces the audience to conclude that the game is rigged. The timeline technique. By juxtaposing specific dates of trades with specific legislative actions, the CHIPS Act, antitrust delays, Vance creates a causal link. He doesn't need to prove a criminal conspiracy in court. He only needs to show the pattern to the public. The pattern itself is the indictment. The both sides defense. Pelosi attempts to deflect by pointing to Republican corruption. Vance neutralizes this by adopting a populist stance. Bring them forward. By refusing to defend his own party's corruption, he claims the moral high ground and frames the issue as the people versus the swamp, rather than Republican versus Democrat. Vance allowed the silence to stretch. He wanted the numbers to sink in. $4 million on one trade. Subsidies. Delays. The machinery of wealth extraction operating in plain sight. Let's move on to something more personal, Vance said. Something smaller, but perhaps more revealing. September 2020. Let's talk about your hair appointment. Pelosi's composure cracked just slightly. Her eyes narrowed. This was the incident she hated discussing the most. Not because it was illegal, but because it was embarrassing. It was petty. And pettiness destroys grandeur. Vance pulled out a still image from a security camera. It was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. It showed Nancy Pelosi walking through a hair salon. Her mask was down around her neck. Her hair was wet. Madam Speaker, San Francisco salons were closed by government order at this time. Orders you publicly supported. Orders you championed on national television. Small business owners were losing everything. Their livelihoods, their savings, their dreams. Regular people couldn't get haircuts. They couldn't go to the gym. They couldn't go to church. The rules said, no. Vance held up the photo. But you needed your hair done. Pelosi's voice turned sharp, brittle. I was set up. That salon owner, she invited me in. She told my assistant that the salon was allowed to do one client at a time. It was a trap orchestrated by right-wing operatives to smear me. So your defense is that you were tricked into breaking the rules you imposed on everyone else? Vance asked, tilting his head. That isn't actually better, Madam Speaker. That implies you didn't know the rules of your own city. She was a Trump supporter, Pelosi shouted. This was a political operation. Let me tell you about that salon owner, Vance said. His voice dropped, becoming intimate, stripping away the politics to reveal the human being underneath. Erica Cayuse, a single mother. She built her business from nothing. Not from a political dynasty like yours. Not from family money. Just hard work. She rented a chair, built a clientele, saved every dime, and eventually opened her own place. The American dream, small-scale version. Vance pulled out another document, a timeline of Erica Cayuse's business. When the lockdowns hit, the lockdowns you supported, she followed the rules. Even though those rules were destroying her business. Even though she couldn't pay her stylists. Even though she couldn't make rent. Even though she couldn't keep the lights on. She followed the rules because that is what law-abiding Americans do. Then you walked in, Speaker of the House, third in line to the presidency. And you got your hair done in a salon that was closed to regular people. Vance leaned forward. And when the security footage leaked, what did you do? Did you apologize? Did you say, I made a mistake, I should have known better, I'm sorry to the people who are sacrificing? He held up a printout of her press statement from that week. No. You went on television and said, she owes me an apology. You demanded that the single mother apologize to you for setting you up. A woman in the gallery said, loud enough for the microphones to catch, shame on her. You painted a woman who was struggling to survive as the villain in your story, Vance said. And after your statement, Erica Cuse received death threats. Hundreds of them. Her home address was posted online. She had to move her family. Eventually, she had to close her business entirely. The salon she built from nothing. Gone. Not because of COVID, but because she let Nancy Pelosi get a haircut. You destroyed her, Madam Speaker. Financially, professionally, personally. You took a working mother who made the mistake of letting you into her business, and you used the full weight of your public platform to crush her. Vance set the documents down. And you never apologized, never admitted fault. To this day. The circumstances were, she should have told me, Pelosi stammered. You didn't know the rules? Vance asked. Madam Speaker, you were the rules. That is your pattern. When regular Americans follow the rules, they lose everything. When you break them, you blame the nearest powerless person and walk away. Analytical expansion, hypocrisy, and the two-tiered system. This section analyzes elite immunity and the weaponization of victimhood. The inversion of responsibility. Vance highlights the core narcissism of the event. Pelosi broke the rules, but claimed she was the victim. I was set up. This inversion, where the powerful politician claims victimhood at the hands of a struggling hairstylist, exposes a profound lack of accountability. The human cost of PR. Vance shifts the focus from the haircut, trivial, to Erica Cuse, tragic. By detailing the death threats and the loss of the business, he shows that Pelosi's PR spin had real-world casualties. He frames Pelosi not just as a hypocrite, but as a bully who punches down. Rules for thee. This is the quintessential example of the two-tiered justice system. The elite are exempt from the restrictions they place on the populace. Vance uses this story to bridge the gap between the ice cream, detachment, and the stocks, corruption, to show a unified theory of Pelosi's character. Arrogance. Vance cleared the table of the smaller incidents, the ice cream, the stocks, the salon. He moved them to the side to make room for the final, heaviest folder. But those are symptoms, Vance said. Let's talk about the disease. Let's talk about 37 years. Let's talk about what actually happened to working Americans while you were claiming to fight for them. Pelosi's face had gone pale. This was the structural argument. This was the legacy killer. Madam Speaker, you have been in Congress since 1987. 37 years. That is longer than I have been alive. Longer than most Americans have been in any job. An entire generation of American history. He opened the folder. Let's look at the scorecard. 1987. In Middletown, Ohio, that town you fly over, the Armco steel plant employed thousands. Good jobs. Union jobs. A man could graduate from high school, walk into that plant, and build a life. Buy a house. Raise a family. Send kids to college. All on one income. Today, that plant is a shell. Those jobs are gone. Shipped to China. Shipped to Mexico. Shipped to Vietnam. Under your watch. Under the trade deals you voted for. Under the economic policies you championed. He pulled out a second document, the opioid crisis. In 1987, the pills didn't exist yet. The poison that would flood communities like mine, that would kill over 100,000 Americans a year, it hadn't started. By 2020, opioids had killed more Americans than every war since Vietnam combined. Vance's voice trembled slightly, the only crack in his armor. Entire communities destroyed, families torn apart, children growing up without parents. My mother was one of them. Addicted. Couldn't hold a job. Couldn't take care of me. My mama raised me because the system failed us. "Where were you, Madam Speaker?" Vance asked. "When the pills flooded our streets? When the pharmaceutical companies paid billions in settlements for destroying American lives? When the doctors were writing scripts like candy? You were in San Francisco, raising money, building your portfolio." "I fought for health care," Pelosi shouted. "I passed legislation to—" "Let's talk about what you built," Vance interrupted. He pulled out her financial disclosures from 1987 and 2024. 1987. When you started in Congress, your reported net worth was approximately $6 million. Not bad. 2024. 37 years of public service later. Your net worth is estimated at over $100 million. Some estimates put it closer to $200 million. The numbers hung in the air like neon signs. During those same 37 years, Vance continued, the median wage for working Americans, adjusted for inflation, went nowhere. In communities like mine, it went backwards. People today work harder than their parents, longer hours, more jobs, and they are falling behind. Vance spread the documents out, connecting the dots. You got 15 times richer, your constituents got poorer, and you call that public service? You presided over the great decoupling, Madam Speaker. The decoupling of the American elite from the American people. You built a world where stock portfolios go up while life expectancy goes down. You built a world where you can eat gourmet ice cream in a $24,000 freezer while your neighbors line up for cheese. Analytical expansion, the great decoupling. This section analyzes the macroeconomic failure of the neoliberal era. Financialization versus deindustrialization. Vance uses Pelosi's net worth as a proxy for the financialization of the economy, making money from money, while using Middletown as a proxy for deindustrialization, the loss of making things. He argues that Pelosi represents the winning side of a class war that destroyed the working class. The opioid metric. By bringing in the opioid crisis, Vance introduces a metric of despair. He argues that the ultimate judgment of a leader isn't GDP or stock market highs, but the health of the community. The fact that life expectancy dropped while Pelosi got rich is presented as a moral indictment. The tenure trap. Pelosi cited her 37 years as a strength. I have experience. Vance jujitsus this into a weakness. You have culpability. If she has been in charge for 40 years, she owns the results. And if the results are bad for the working class, she is the architect of their suffering. The room was heavy with the weight of the numbers Vance had just read. $100 million. 37 years. The silence that followed was not the respectful silence of a legislative chamber. It was the suffocating silence of a tomb. Then, from the back of the room, a sound shattered the quiet. He's right. It wasn't a heckle. It was a wail. A woman stood up in the public gallery. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s, wearing a faded windbreaker and clutching a handbag, that had seen better days. Her face was red, streaked with tears, contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated grief. Security officers moved toward her immediately, their hands resting on their belts, but she didn't seem to see them. Her eyes were locked on Nancy Pelosi. "My husband worked at the docks in Oakland for 30 years, she screamed, her voice cracking. "He was a union man. He voted for you every single time. Every time!" The chairman banged his gavel. "Order! The gallery will come to order!" She ignored him. She ignored the officers grabbing her arms. "While you were getting rich, his pension got cut," she shouted, fighting against the restraint. "His health care got worse. He died last year because we couldn't afford the insulin. We couldn't afford the co-pays." Pelosi stared at the woman, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. For decades, she had been insulated from this. She saw voters at fundraisers. She saw them at staged town halls. She saw them through the tinted windows of a black SUV. She had never seen them like this, raw, angry, and grieving. "You were supposed to help us," the woman sobbed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "We believed in you. 37 years. And what did we get?" The officers were dragging her toward the heavy double doors now. She dug her heels into the carpet, desperate to get the last words out. "Nothing!" she screamed. "You got $100 million, and we got nothing!" The doors slammed shut. The sound was like a gunshot. The echo of her scream hung in the air. Nothing. 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 Vance didn't speak. He didn't bang his gavel. He didn't look at the officers. He looked at Pelosi. He let the silence stretch, letting the woman's voice settle into the bones of everyone in the room. Finally, Pelosi cleared her throat. She adjusted her microphone, her hand shaking slightly. "Mr. Vice President," she said, her voice tight, "I resent the orchestration of this theater, bringing in paid agitators to—" "Stop." Vance's voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. "That wasn't a plant, Madam Speaker. That wasn't a Republican operative. That wasn't theater. That was one of your constituents. That was a working-class woman who did everything right. She voted. She worked. She trusted. And she watched her husband die while you were trading stock options. I never met that woman before in my life. I don't know her name. But I know 1,000 people just like her back home in Middletown. People who believed that the Democrats were the party of the working man. People who waited 37 years for you to deliver on your promises. And what did they get? Vance asked. They got ignored. They got left behind. And now they are getting angry. She isn't an agitator, Madam Speaker. She is the ghost of Christmas past. She is the reality you have been hiding from behind your gates in Pacific Heights. Analytical expansion. The voice of the voiceless. This section breaks the fourth wall of political theater. The intrusion of reality. Senate hearings are scripted rituals. The interruption by the widow disrupts the script. It introduces raw emotion into a sterile environment. It validates Vance's statistical arguments, net worth versus poverty, with a human face. It proves that the forgotten man isn't a rhetorical device. She is a real person in the room. The paid agitator defense. Pelosi's immediate instinct to dismiss the woman as a plant reveals her disconnect. It shows she cannot conceive of genuine organic dissent from her own base. Vance's rebuttal, "I never met her," reinforces his role as the conduit for this rage, not the creator of it. The verdict, the woman's final line, "You got $100 million and we got nothing," is the narrative summary of the entire hearing. It is the prosecution's closing argument. delivered not by the Vice President, but by the victim. Vance watched Pelosi. She was looking at the door where the woman had been dragged out, her expression unreadable. "Let me ask you something, Madam Speaker," Vance said, "and I want you to really think about the answer. When did you stop caring?" Pelosi blinked, snapping her attention back to him. "I have always—" "Was it when your net worth hit $10 million?" Vance asked. "Was it when it hit $50 million? Was it when you got the ice cream freezers?" "I have always cared about working families," she shouted, her voice shrill. "Was it when you realized the rules didn't apply to you?" Vance pressed, his voice relentless. "When you figured out you could trade on information regular Americans couldn't access? When you realized you could shut down a city and still get a haircut? I have fought my entire career. Or was it earlier?" Vance cut over her. "When the factories started closing in 1987, and you noticed it didn't affect your portfolio? When the opioids started killing people, and you realized none of them were from your neighborhood?" Pelosi stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she hissed. "I have destroyed political careers. I have taken down presidents. I will not be lectured by some hillbilly who got lucky with a book deal." The slur hung in the air. Hillbilly. Vance didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Madam Speaker, we had a saying in the Marines," Vance said calmly. "Don't threaten. Either do it or don't. You've been threatening people for 37 years. I'm not impressed." He looked past her, toward the Democratic side of the dais. "And neither are they." Pelosi turned. She looked for Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, the man she had handpicked to succeed her. He was standing up. He wasn't looking at her. He was gathering his papers. He walked to the side exit, his face blank. He didn't run. He just left. She looked for Katie Porter, her protégé from California. Porter was already at the door. She paused, looked back at Pelosi for a split second, a look of pity, and then walked out. She looked for Adam Schiff, her loyal lieutenant. His chair was empty. He had slipped out the back entrance minutes ago. The Congressional Black Caucus members sat in stone silence. They didn't stand up to defend her. They didn't object. They just watched. Even her own staff, the Praetorian Guard, were edging away from the table. One senior aide was furiously texting, her back turned to the speaker. Nancy Pelosi looked around the room. The chamber that she had ruled with an iron fist, the institution she called the House, was rejecting her. It wasn't a loud rejection. There were no boos. It was the quiet, terrifying rejection of irrelevance. Power is a shadow on the wall, Vance thought, and the sun just went down. "You are alone, Madam Speaker," Vance said softly. "The Queen has no knights left." Analytical expansion, political Darwinism. This section analyzes the mechanics of loyalty in Washington, the nature of power. Pelosi's power was transactional. She commanded loyalty because she could deliver money and votes. Once Vance exposed her as a liability, a symbol of corruption and decay, the transaction ended. The exodus of Jeffries and Schiff represents the party apparatus cutting off a gangrenous limb to save the body. The hillbilly slur, Pelosi's use of the slur, is her final undoing. It reveals her class prejudice. It confirms Vance's entire thesis, that she views his people with contempt. It is a loss of control that signals she has run out of political arguments and is left only with personal animus. The visual of isolation. The scene of Pelosi standing alone while her allies flee is the visual climax of her career. It creates a stark contrast to the images of her surrounded by cheering crowds and adoring staffers. It emphasizes that in politics, you are only as powerful as your last win. The realization hit her in waves. First, confusion. Then, disbelief. Then, horror. Nancy Pelosi sat back down. Her legs felt weak. The cameras zoomed in. They were merciless. They captured the high-definition reality of a legend unraveling. Her hands, the famous hands that had clapped sarcastically at Trump, that had torn up the State of the Union speech, began to tremble. She tried to clasp them together on the table, but they shook violently. She reached for her water glass. She needed to wet her throat. She needed a second to think. Her hand hovered over the glass. It was shaking so badly she knew she couldn't lift it without spilling. She pulled her hand back. She looked up at Vance. She tried to summon the old fire. She tried to find the words that had crushed opponents for decades. The working families. I have always. Her voice failed. It wasn't the commanding contralto of the speaker. It was the thin, wavering voice of an 84-year-old woman who was tired and scared. For 37 years, I have... She couldn't finish the sentence. The mask cracked. The perfect makeup, the frozen smile, the imperious gaze. It all dissolved. A single tear formed in her left eye. It welled up, shimmering under the studio lights, and then rolled down her cheek. She blinked furiously, trying to stop it. But another followed. And another. Nancy Pelosi was crying. Not the performed tears of a politician at a funeral. These were the involuntary tears of humiliation. The tears of someone who realizes that their legacy has been stripped away in front of the entire world. She sat there in her $15,000 suit, surrounded by the ghosts of her career, facing a man from a town she had forgotten existed. And she had absolutely nothing to say. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30. It was an eternity on live television. Vance watched her. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He felt a strange pang of pity, not for the politician, but for the human being who had traded her soul for power and was now realizing the exchange rate was poor. He slowly closed the folder in front of him. I have no further questions for the witness, Vance said quietly. I think she has answered everything the American people needed to hear. He stood up. Or rather, she couldn't answer, which tells them everything they need to know. Vance turned and walked out of the hearing room. Behind him, the cameras lingered on the image of Nancy Pelosi, alone, trembling, silent, sitting in the wreckage of her own history. Analytical expansion, the end of the boomer consensus. This section serves as a cultural obituary. The physicality of defeat, the trembling hands and the undrunk water symbolize the loss of control. For decades, Pelosi's brand was control. Losing physical command of her own body mirrors the loss of political command over the House. The tear. The single tear is the puncture wound in the balloon. It humanizes her in the worst possible way for a power broker. It makes her look pitiable. It signals that the Iron Lady facade was just a shell. The generational shift. Vance walking away while she sits alone represents the passing of the torch, not a peaceful transition, but a hostile takeover. It symbolizes the end of the boomer consensus, neoliberal institutionalism, and the rise of a new, raw populism that demands receipts. The hearing ended at noon. By 4 p.m., the Internet had rendered its verdict. Number 37 years was the #1 trending topic globally. Number Pelosi portfolio was number 2. The clip of the Oakland widow screaming, "You got $100 million and we got nothing," had 150 million views on TikTok alone. It had been remixed, subtitled, and shared by everyone from union workers to crypto bros. Pelosi's office released a statement at 5 p.m. Vice President Vance's performance today was a partisan attack designed to distract from the administration's failures. It relied on out-of-context quotes and misleading characterizations. Speaker Pelosi remains proud of her 37-year record of service. It was a standard D.C. press release. In 2010, it would have worked. In 2025, it was blood in the water. She's still doing it, read the top comment on X. Still talking about partisan attacks. She didn't answer a single question. She literally learned nothing. The next morning, the dam broke. Hakeem Jeffries appeared on Meet the Press. When asked about the hearing, he didn't defend her. Nancy Pelosi has a historic legacy, Jeffries said carefully. But I think there are legitimate questions about stock trading that deserve answers. The American people demand transparency. It was the polite knife in the back. San Francisco saw protests, not from Republicans, from progressives. They gathered outside her Pacific Heights mansion, holding signs that read, 37 years, $0 results, and "We want ice cream too." She doesn't represent us, a young organizer told the news cameras. She represents her portfolio. She represents the past. 3 weeks later, a primary challenger announced a run for her seat. A 29-year-old community organizer. Her announcement video opened with the clip of the salon owner, Erica Hughes. The challenger likely wouldn't win. The machine was still too strong. But the fact that she was running, that the queen was being challenged in her own castle, proved the aura of invincibility was gone. JD Vance sat for an interview with Tucker Carlson. "Do you feel bad?" Tucker asked. "About the tears? About the collapse?" Vance leaned back. "I feel bad for the woman from Oakland," Vance said. "I feel bad for Erica Hughes. I feel bad for the millions of people who lost their jobs while their leaders got rich." The Speaker of the House crying on television because someone asked her to account for her wealth? Vance shook his head. "That's not tragedy, Tucker. That's accountability, and we don't see nearly enough of it." Analytical expansion. The speed of narrative collapse. This section analyzes the velocity of information in the digital age. The failure of spin. Pelosi's press release failed because it used analog tactics, vague denial, against digital threats, specific viral clips. The internet allows the audience to fact-check in real time. The contrast between her statement and the video evidence created a reality gap that destroyed her credibility. The soft coup. Jeffries' interview is a masterclass in political euthanasia. By praising her legacy while validating the questions, he effectively retires her. He signals to the donor class that she is now a liability. The definition of tragedy. Vance redefines the emotional narrative. He refuses to accept the frame that Pelosi is a victim of bullying. He recenters the victims of her policies. This prevents the media from turning her into a sympathetic figure. Pacific Heights, San Francisco. 2 weeks later. The mansion was quiet. The phone, which used to ring every 5 minutes with calls from presidents, donors, and whips, was silent. Nancy Pelosi sat alone at her kitchen table. It was a beautiful kitchen. Marble countertops, custom cabinetry, a view of the bay lights twinkling in the distance. But she wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at the stainless steel behemoths against the wall. The Sub-Zero freezers. They hummed. a low electric vibration that seemed to fill the empty house. She hadn't opened them in weeks. She couldn't bear to look inside. She knew what was in there. Jenny's splendid ice cream, $13 a pint, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, the symbols of her ruin. She thought about the hearing. She thought about Vance, that hillbilly. How dare he? How dare he question her service? She had saved the country. She had 37 years. The voice of the woman from Oakland echoed in her mind, louder than the hum of the fridge. You got $100 million, and we got nothing. She looked at her hands. They were trembling again. She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that the woman was right. She had won the game of Washington. She had won the power. She had won the money. But she had lost the people. She had flown over them for so long that she had forgotten they were real. And when they finally grabbed her ankle and pulled her back down to earth, she shattered. Nancy Pelosi sat in the dark, surrounded by the wealth she could no longer enjoy, the power she could no longer wield, and a legacy that was melting away like ice cream left out on the counter. She was the queen of the house, and she was completely, utterly alone. If you believe that public servants should serve the public, if you believe that rules should apply to everyone, if you believe that 37 years of failure deserves a reckoning, subscribe and share this story with everyone who is ready for accountability in Washington. Analytical expansion, the hollow victory. The conclusion synthesizes the narrative themes: wealth versus worth, the haunting. The hum of the freezer serves as a literary device, a telltale heart. It represents the guilt, or at least the source of the downfall, that she cannot escape. The object of her luxury has become the object of her torment. The isolation. The final image is one of profound isolation. It argues that the pursuit of raw power and wealth, when decoupled from service and morality, leads to a lonely end. It frames her not as a villain to be hated, but as a tragic figure who gained the world, but lost her soul. The final verdict: the story ends by validating the populist critique. The elite have detached themselves from the nation, and that detachment is their fatal flaw. Pelosi's fall is the inevitable result of a ruling class that forgot who they work for.